they got a big bounce or a big push on those IPOs, which helped the market. And you know, those two items seem to contribute quite a bit to what was happening in China. If we go over to Europe, there we thought that we might see some more pressure before they tried to flip around, and that's exactly what we got. Into the swing point high. This is the first time back on the DAX, so this is a retest regen finally on the German DAX as it comes into it. More than 6 bars. Usually that's an automatic buy as you come into it on the first test. We'll see if that's true tomorrow. It did come in with less volume, so from that perspective it looks like it wants to flip around and try to run higher. So from each of the items that I typically look at, this does look like it's going to try to bounce back up and push back to pressure back up to the top side, right? So like anything else, the key will be is how do you act as you come back into the resistance zones, and that will be quite true here as it is most cases in most places. Let's look at the FTSE. So the FTSE actually had an ABCD structure on the way down. Volume expands as it comes down. It did come into these areas from before, so that's a prior swing point high. It had already tested, so that high was 67.0630. The volume there is 8.7. You got 8.4 here. You come into it with 9. So I do think it will come back down. It may not come immediately back down, but this one's not done to the downside. So that says we're going to see a little bit more pressure in the FTSE itself. And if we go over to the CACs, which in my opinion is the economic drag of the big three, the CACs test into the lows. So it got into these swing point lows. Volume on those guys 1.1, 1.4, and you come into it with 1.05. So you test into the lows, you don't have the volume. After a move down, after a completed ABCD structure plus on the downside, this thing's going to flip around and bounce too. So you're going to see Europe probably up by the time you get up. I would think Asia carries higher, a little bit higher tonight. And then we'll see what our markets want to do. There's not much data out tomorrow. You do have the Russell remix that takes place once a year. Some names get thrown out, some new ones get in. That's how they keep those indexes going, right? It's one of the things I talked about in my book most people don't think about, but if you look at it, they're constantly calling the weak and putting in the strong. How do indexes go up? When you look at those charts from 20, 30, 40 years ago, you got two factors that are making them look like they go up forever. One is inflation. The other is you're constantly calling out the weak and putting in the strong. And so you have a natural bias to the upside, and that's exactly what you see in these indexes. That's why they, that's one of the reasons. I'm not saying they don't go up. They do go up. But they're exaggerated to the upside as a result of those two items. Elsewhere, let me see, the only other one, Asia, go back to Asia, Taiwan. Taiwan looked really strong, trading near the highs, popping back up there. And if we use that as a segue to come back to the major sectors here domestically, you'll see why that's interesting, because as Taiwan goes, that's typically how the SOX goes. And the SOX actually traded under back over one more time. This thing's going to come back up and test those highs again. It still has an ABCD structure up and could be setting up another one at this point. So you'd have nested ABCD structures if in fact that's what's happening. So this one's a fairly small one if that does do what it's supposed to. And then you'd already finished off the other one, but there is another one up here from the weekly. So you may get those nested ABCD structures that give it one more push to take it up and finish off what it started. So that's the SOX. I don't think I'm going to go through all of these, but let's look at the interesting ones. Let's start with the XLB. XLB's been pressing the highs here, and it's been pressing it with volume. It looks like it's going to continue to do that. XLE, as we talked about last night, looked like it wanted to try to bounce higher. It is, and that's despite the fact that oil itself keeps coming down, although oil still remains elevated and wants to test that little low of the gap bar higher. And they'll probably test that one tomorrow, I would think. Elsewhere, XLF, this guy is really struggling. This, in my opinion, is kind of neutral at this point. This is the second trip back into the retest regenerate zone. That zone from this prior swing point high, remember it came in, tested it once, regenerated higher, but could not actually get above the highs. And so now you're coming back down one more time, and you never like to see the second time down. The third time down is like death. Second time down is more like a coin flip. So it did get the turnaround, was slightly higher volume. It looks to me like it's going to do some more probing potentially as early as tomorrow. XLI, we've been waiting on this one to come back and do the retest regen, and it is. It's coming right into it, test into it, does almost a full retest. Volume's lighter. That one looks like it's finally did what it needed to do and can head back higher. Also, just about finished off the ABCD structure. Could test, if we get some weakness elsewhere, could test a little bit lower, but it looks like it is going to hold. XLV, money rotating to this area, has been, still is, been the strongest one the last week or so, and the last month and a half has been a decent strength. Volume still coming in, still looking good. XLY also wants to push back and try to get over these highs finally, over this high of this bar, which is 66.61. You get over that into the zone, right, it's going to test that swing point high. So XLY, which has been the weakest one, that's the discretionary select sector, still holding retest regens. In fact, we haven't had but one to fail. That was the XLP. Came down with volume today, but hung on to that swing point low just barely by a penny. That one looks like it's going to bounce, but there's trouble in the consumer staples area. So I don't know that that's someplace I would be looking. If I go over and look at the Ox markets as my last hurrah, got this one wrong. I talked about the TLT. I was ready to write a check on this one. One of my members called me on the check ideal and wanted to know where I would, or wanted to let me know where to send it. Last night I made a joke that I didn't think this thing was going any higher. Well, that's why you never bet the farm on anything, because you can definitely be wrong. This thing does go higher, and it didn't fail today. It actually held a little bit higher volume. It is testing each time up. It's testing another bar. Now it's testing the June 2nd bar. Gets over it, back underneath it, fails. It's also testing into the May 15th bar, gets into it, back underneath it, fails there as well, and is now within shouting distance of the lows of the highs. I do think this is going to fail and come back and do some more work, but it had been bullish a long time. People keep coming back to bullish things until they get slapped enough. And so far, they clearly haven't been slapped enough here. Gold. Gold still hanging at the highs. Doesn't want to give it up. Silver, even better, is hanging at the highs, right? This thing hasn't even came off. That's like extremely overbought short term, yet doesn't want to give it up at all. If we go over and look at the sectors for the gold, they actually held up today. I thought they were going to come back in a little bit more. They didn't. They were down this morning, then flipped around. Same thing here on the GDXJ. I see a question over here from Tommy asking about XLB, or the fact that I talked about XLB. He's looking at X, which is United Steel. Wants to know if it's, or let me see, what's the question? Wants to know, he's looking for an entry. Okay, so the first thing I would bring up is that we're moving in that point of a year where you need to be aware of, when these things are going to report. So I mean, I can look it up right quick for you. So that'd be the first thing I'd do. And let me pop over and see what that looks like. So earnings boards X, let's see when it comes up. July 30th, so that's a little bit farther out. So you got a month. Okay, so volume here is 7.7 as it tests into the top of this bar, which was 8.9. So essentially you were trying to get over this area. It didn't quite get to the top, so it didn't quite test it, but your volume expands as you go up there, which is good. And so that all looks nice, right? Got a nice little build up here in volume. So on the way back, the thing that really stands out is this bar. And the bottom of this one. So that is your target area. That's where you ought to be looking. Your risk on it is back underneath this area. And so I would risk back to here on a trade like this. What's your gain? Well, the fact that it hit this with as much volume as it didn't quite get over the highs, makes me think that you're probably going to get a bigger push. You got two swing point highs sitting up there. You break over that, it's going to run you up to this one. So your target, on a short-term basis, is probably this area, top of this high. And as a result of that, yeah, actually, I hadn't looked at this closely until now. You've actually got a retest regen zone right here, right? And so it didn't quite get into, or did it? Let's see. That low was 2632. Yeah, it did. It got into it. So it tested into it, but it hit with so much volume, it's going to test into it again, and it missed it by a penny today. And now your volume's shrinking. I think this is going to pull back, and you're going to get it back down in that area I just showed you. And then it's going to pop back up, and it's going to try to make the run. Now, it does have an ABCD structure up already. It's not a large one, but it is one that's in place to try to take it up to that area I was just talking about. So this one's more of a toss-up. It looks to me like it will pull back, but it could run up here before it pulls back. So I don't know. I don't think you can buy it here because your risk is too great. Because you'd have to risk back too low, and your risk reward just isn't there. It's 1-to-1 here. So your entry's down here if you can get it. If not, you're just going to have to let it go up there and then come back, and then you can set up for it. Let's see what the weekly looks like. And you got a big volume bar too. That's going to be hard to get over. So yeah, I do think you'll get the pull back. Yeah, I think so. So that's where I'd be looking. Dave asked me, I'm looking for an entry in NSIT. I missed the break over the swing points today. So let's see what this one looks like. NSIT, Insight Enterprises. So you got to break. What Dave's talking about here is you got to break over multiple swing point highs. That's always something good. And so that usually leads to 2 to 3 bars extension, right, to the top side. So you can kind of expect this thing to try to extend higher. Doesn't mean it will extend higher. It could just kind of go sideways, and then come back. What you really want, of course, if you're in it, is 6 bars before you come back, but you're not in it, so maybe you'll get that. Let's see. So you break over it is suspect. It is over 2. I think you're going to have to try to catch it on a retrace into that area. That top is 2952. Yeah, so somewhere between 2950, 2952. Let's see what the weekly looks like. And your big bar here is 2952. So yeah, you may get a shot at it tomorrow. You may get a shot at 2952 tomorrow, but This one doesn't look bad at all. When's earnings on these guys? In SIT, earnings are slated for August 4th right now. Yeah, that looks to be the trade, right? If you can catch it here, realize, you know, your stop's got to go below the support zone, so that's your risk. The fact, you know, there's two ways to look at your extensions. It just finished up an ABCD today, which means it probably should come back in, but the swing point highs may prevent that. But you got a range breakout as well. So it's been in this range. So remember how we always draw things that are about equidistance? Well, you can expect it to try to get up there before it's over. So if you can pick it up here, you know, you're risking back to probably this area. And you should be prepared to buy some more down here if it comes back that low. All right, as far as the rest of the markets, since I have a little bit of time, I don't always get this much time. Let's pop through some. Let's pop through some of the secondary sectors and see what they're looking like. So let me get these up. Let's take a look at some of these and see how they're faring. So biotech continues ABCD structures on the way up. Yeah, that's not bad looking. On the weekly, yeah, I just don't know if it's going to go much farther though. It's probably done the majority. You know, it just keeps clawing higher. The GDX, GDXJ, we'd already looked at. Here's the broker dealers. These guys have been struggling. So now here's a case where, you know, you're getting clearly in a stronger sector or a stronger stock, you get a break of multiple swing points like this, you expect it to carry. I said 2 to 3 bars. Well, it kind of hung up there for 4 bars, but that's weak. And when you see something like this, and I've talked about this before, where you break over multiple swing point highs and then you can't hold and extend, right? You don't get the extension. Well, believe me, that's going to come back at you, and that's exactly what it's doing. So broker dealers don't look that good to me. Not exactly a great place to have your money right now. We looked at the BBH. Here's the IBB, which is the NASDAQ version of it. Looks almost the same. That still looks pretty strong, but kind of worn on the way up. So here's the software. Now, remember Intel came out and told us that things were a lot better than they thought, that you're getting a PC upgrade cycle going on in the corporate world. Well, that's what this is reflecting as well. This looks like a pretty good setup. Let me see what the weekly looks like. Yeah, problem is they're so thin that you get such big spikes, it's hard to read a chart like this. You can't really count volume hardly, which kind of diminishes the power of the neoclassical. It does look like it's going to try to get back to the highs though. So that's looking pretty strong. If I look at the global financials, boy, they got hit. And I assume that's off the BNG story where they got slammed. So global financials, and we're seeing financials weak here as well, like we've already talked about, so that's part of what's going on there. Here's that real estate sector. I know I've been asked a few questions about it, people wanting to get back in it. You know, my thought was that it would try to come back down, and that is kind of what it's doing here. If I was a classical technician, I might be tempted to say that's a head and shoulders type setup. You know, kind of a head, a shoulder there, a head here, and another shoulder over here, right? But what you don't have from a classical setup is that you don't have the volume tells correctly. So that just looks like consolidation to me. And the real worry if you're in this group or wanting to get in this group is you got a lot of swing point lows down here. So, you know, you start breaking down this area, it's going to get ugly quick probably. Let's look at that weekly one more time. Yeah, and you don't have a retest regen. So I suspect before this is over, you're going to see this thing come back and test this. And that's probably where your buy is going to be on it if you're interested. So that's the real estate sector. Let's take a look at insurance, and that's struggling as well, and that just looks to come back in and do a retest regen. So that's going to try to come back in, retest regen off the swing point high. So nothing major there, but certainly not adding to pressure to the upside. And this one now is setting up pretty good. This is the regional banking. Matter of fact, this is probably the best of the financials so far in terms of the way it's set up. Yeah, this one doesn't look bad. So, and the reason I'm saying that is, you know, you can see some things happening here that you'd like to see. Push up, volume kind of escalated on the way up. Trails off, right? Volume a little bit lower, and then you get a big spike up, volume expands. Now you trail back down, volume shrinking, right? And now you test these lows with slightly less volume, and now you're pushing back up. You got a swing point high up there. This is a retest regen originally off of this area, and you can see how it held. So to me, this is a nice looking setup. Let me make a note of that one for myself. So KRE looks pretty good. Let's look at the oil services. So this is the OIH, and that one's already back at the highs, and it's got volume. That looks, you know, we were talking about the XLE earlier. Well, this one's already back up there. Looks to test some more. We were talking about X earlier. That's in the steel sector. Here's steel stocks, or the steel ETF. That one just broke over a swing point high. It looks like it's going to go after the highs. And you got multiple swing point highs on the weekly. So that's not a bad sector. And before I get out of here, let me look at 2 or 3 more. Here's TAN. That one set up pretty good as well to the top side. Social media, of course, has been running higher. That one looks good too. So, you know, subsectors look pretty good overall, not bad. All right, folks, that's it for this week. I hope you had a good week. Let's see what tomorrow brings. Looks to me like these markets are going to try to push into the end of the month, finish it out, make everybody happy, and then July. Have yourself a great night. Thanks for joining me. Take care. Until next time, I'm LA. This is, and it was, your daily TA wrap. I'll see you on the next show. Good night, folks.